America's top researchers say Russia's cutting corners to develop its coronavirus vaccine. While President Putin is claiming a vaccine victory, 25 other contenders across the planet are still in human trials. That means there could be several coronavirus vaccines. So NBC News correspondent Tom Costello asks, would countries rather be first or get it right?
Allison, good day. An awful lot of skepticism here about what Vladimir Putin is suggesting, that Russia is the first in the world to develop a vaccine, even though it appears to have sidelined some of the normal safety protocols. Among the skeptics, Dr. Anthony Fauci.
It may not be a Cold War arms race, but Russia and the West are clearly in a race to get an effective COVID vaccine into the arms of people around the world. Russia calls its vaccine Sputnik V for vaccine, a not-so-subtle reference to its first victory in the early space race. The Kremlin insists its vaccine is safe and mass distribution will begin in October for the Russian population. Vladimir Putin's own daughter has reportedly received the vaccine, developing the virus's antibodies. But Russia has not yet published any of its scientific data and has not begun critical phase 3 human trials. U.S. experts, including Dr. Anthony Fauci, are skeptical.
I hope that the Russians have actually definitively proven that the vaccine is safe and effective. I seriously doubt that they've done that.
Dr. Michelle McMurray-Heath represents America's biotech drug makers.
There's been a lot of skepticism that maybe the Russians didn't do their due diligence on this vaccine attempt.
Well, the skepticism is warranted at this point. We really don't know what it is they're testing, what it is they've seen. And at this point, it's really purely based upon their word, and that's not typically the way we reach scientific conclusions.
Meanwhile, the White House has announced yet another major deal with the drug maker. This one, a $1.5 billion deal with Moderna for 100 million doses of its experimental vaccine.
We're on track to rapidly produce 100 million doses as soon as the vaccine is approved, and up to 500 million shortly thereafter.
Worldwide, 25 vaccines are now in human trials. Among the leading contenders, Moderna, J&J, Pfizer, AstraZeneca, Inovio, and Novavax. And multiple vaccines will likely be needed.
Some may work better in the elderly, some with African Americans or people of Hispanic ethnicity. Who knows? Some better in children. We might be able to target these vaccines to be used in those different populations.
Back to that Russian vaccine, a lot of concern that with the Russians apparently rushing this vaccine to market, that will undermine confidence in all vaccines, undermine faith in the vaccine production process and the science behind it. But the FDA is insisting it will not compromise its own standards, its own protocols. It will not bring a vaccine to market before it's confident that it's safe.
Texas just saw its highest daily increase in COVID-19 cases in almost a week, according to the Houston Chronicle. So what does the fight to save lives look like in the state? One doctor in Hidalgo County, Texas, brought us inside his dying patient's room to show us just how tough it is. This video isn't necessarily graphic, but you may find it upsetting.
I was woken up to the usual phone call of a patient who's been dying for 5 days but refuses to die. Obviously, I can't show a picture of the patient, but I'm sitting here and this woman who's dying has changed her mind multiple times. She's actively dying. And what I wanted to video was for you to hear the sound of these poor patients. So as they progress, this is all you hear in these units is a gasping for breath. That's her. That's her gasping. It's horrible. The next step is putting her on a ventilator, which the family is insisting, and we strongly disagree. Frustrating. Last night, after having 4 people die on my service, one of them 1 hour after I discharged back to the nursing home, and having to convince the family why it was an unwise decision to keep her in the hospital, only to be reprimanded by the family an hour later. Then when I'm going home, I get a call from a local funeral director who has a morgue approximately 10 blocks away, and said he needed to see me because he was having an emotional breakdown. So at midnight, I go to the morgue, where he promptly shows me 90 cadavers. That's right, 90 dead people. 90 dead people, all from the same thing. 90 dead people. And so you can imagine the exhaustion, emotionally, physically, that I'm being forced to live, only to get home and to see that I've gotten delivered toward UPS a package with a card inside. Well, you can imagine the emotional relief, exhaustion, and tears that this letter from I don't know who, from I don't know where, this person who took the time to send words of encouragement, just to recognize what we do.
Is Education Secretary Betsy DeVos using the pandemic to push her personal agenda? Some education policy experts are accusing the Department of Education of funneling emergency coronavirus aid to private schools. NBC News Digital takes a look at how DeVos has been working remotely from her Michigan estate with few public events and potentially privatizing more of America's education system.
There are few debates in America today that divide people more than school reopenings. Parents rightfully cracking under the pressure of playing full-time teacher, caretaker, and remote worker, all under the same roof. Add to the mix a president who calls for full-scale reopening, come what may.
Keeping them out of school and keeping work closed is causing death also. Economic harm, but it's causing death.
Districts are fearful of sick kids, sick teachers, and sick support staff. And all the while, state education budgets are being gutted the country over as tax revenues crater. Into this breach steps Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos, who some are accusing of playing partisan games with life and death education funding by floating a de facto national voucher plan once again.
There are no words to express how outraged educators are and public school advocates are.
The CARES Act provided $13.5 billion worth of stopgap funding for elementary and secondary schools. But some public school advocacy groups and education policy experts say Secretary DeVos is trying to take advantage of the pandemic to further her personal agenda of privatizing more of the education system.
They're giving us precious little to work with. Thanks to Betsy DeVos, the little that's in there is also to be shared with private schools in another attempt at vouchers.
At a time when the public schools are very much in need, it's a little problematic to put money into private school.
The debate over school choice, as its supporters call it, or privatizing education, as its detractors would term it, has been a core tenet of Secretary DeVos's public life.
Betsy DeVos has devoted a large portion of her adult life to pushing for vouchers.
Vouchers allow for state funding to be diverted away from public schools in favor of giving vouchers to parents that they can then use to send their kids to private or religious schools.
I've always believed education funding should be tied to students, not systems, and that necessity has never been more evident.
The language Secretary DeVos has used during the pandemic and the policy she's advocating smack of another attempt at nationalizing vouchers, according to some.
We are dealing with a Secretary of Education who has at her core a foundation of principles that says we shouldn't have public education. It should be an industry. It should be a for-profit business. And that she sees that as her job. She's really quite pleased with herself. And we are not.
More recently, Secretary DeVos, who once called public schools a dead end, has attempted to divert yet more money away from public schools in favor of private ones. And while Congress did provide some latitude to help fund private schools that serve low-income students, DeVos may have overstepped her authority.
Betsy DeVos decided that more money should go to private schools. And so she set forth this rule that's pushing school districts to provide funding for private schools based on their overall enrollment, including affluent students, not just the enrollment of low-income students.
In response to this, 2 lawsuits have been filed to block her actions, one spearheaded by the NAACP. The Department of Education declined an interview, but Angela Morabito, its press secretary, did respond to an email saying, "This pandemic affected all students, and the CARES Act requires that funding should be used to help all students. There is no reasonable explanation for debating the use of federal funding to serve both public and private K-12 students." President Trump has said he supports something resembling a national voucher program in response to schools fearful of reopening amid a pandemic.
If schools stay closed, the money should follow the students so families are in control of decisions about their sons and daughters.
For those that oppose vouchers, though, this rhetoric and policy gets 2 things wrong. 1, it diverts money away from already resource-strapped public schools. And 2, ultimately, according to numerous academic studies, vouchers are ineffective at best.
We've found that they are not providing a benefit overall on average for kids who would otherwise be in public school, particularly around math results, a decrease in achievement. We require a great deal of our public schools. There are so many different things that we ask our public schools to do, and we don't fund them anywhere near the level that they need.
Hey, NBC News fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.